Hey everyone, welcome back to the RetroBreak Podcast. We have a very exciting episode for you today because I've actually got a special guest on the show. So today we have Ads. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone?
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me on. Well, as Nick just said, my name is Ads, and I am a video essayist. I make usually long videos, mostly about gaming and visual novels.
I do absolutely love your channel, by the way. So when you replied to that tweet saying you were interested, I was like, yes, I've got to get him on the show. I do really enjoy them. I think they're fantastic.
Oh, I appreciate that.
One of the things when I was actually looking through your channel, we actually share a lot in common in terms of like tasting games and stuff. And it's not really a genre that I talk about much, visual novels. So I was really excited to talk to you about that today as well. But let's start from the beginning. Like, how did you get into gaming? I think that'd be a good place to, kind of help people understand where this channel and where your interest in visual novels and stuff came from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been gaming for about as long as I can remember. I remember being, 4 or 5 years old playing Flash games on the family computer. I had a Game Boy Advance when I was in kindergarten, and I just kind of kept up with it ever since. And as I got older, my taste started to change, and I eventually moved on to more traditional games, Steam and whatnot. And it's just been a lifelong interest of mine, and that's never gone away.
That's awesome. What were some of the GBA games that you grew up with?
The ones I remember the most were Pokemon Emerald. That was like
Classic.
the first game I really got into. And I actually played the GBA port of Donkey Kong Country, which is actually really good.
Oh, interesting. And you'd never played the SNES version before that either.
No, that was a little before my time.
Yeah. You made me feel old when you said you've had a GBA in kindergarten. Oh my god. I had the original brick Game Boy back then. It's interesting to hear from someone who didn't start right from the beginning of gaming as well. So what did you think of Donkey Kong Country at the time? I guess you probably weren't really thinking about games from a technical perspective or anything, but did it still feel fun considering it was a kind of old game at that point even?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't think critically about, anything. It was
Yeah,
just,
as kids do.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
was one of those things. Any game I got, I played and obsessed over, even the terrible games. But Donkey Kong Country is like actually a really good game, and I'll be honest, I played it not that long ago, and I don't know how I even beat it as a kid. When you're that young, it almost doesn't really matter what you play. You're going to enjoy the experience for what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up with the original Donkey Kong Country, actually, so we're kind of similar in that sense. One of my earliest memories is actually playing Donkey Kong Country 1 all the way through to the end. It was at like some sort of play park thing where, the parents are off shopping and the kids are all in this room, and there was a SNES in the corner, and I had a crowd of kids around me watching me as I played all the way through the original Donkey Kong Country. That was a really fun memory.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So, yeah, after the GBA then, did you get any consoles or did you go straight onto PC gaming from that point?
Eventually, I ended up getting a Wii. Back
Yeah.
when everybody got a Wii at that time. Didn't really get very many games on it. I had some fun with it. Got into a couple of GameCube games. Not too much, but the next like significant moment, aside from the Nintendo handhelds, was the PC stuff.
And what sort of games did you play on the PC to begin with? Not visual novels straight away on.
No, that came much later. Yeah, I mean, ever since I played the Flash games, I always kind of stuck with it pretty much until Flash died. I mean, not super seriously, but every once in a while I'd go back to it. I played RuneScape from a very young age, and from there, I think the first like traditional PC game that I can remember getting into was probably Payday 2.
Okay, interesting. And yeah, RIP Flash.
Yeah.
I used to play Flash games all the time as well.
Yeah, I think I actually got my dad into them, and he still sometimes plays them.
There is a project going on at the minute where people are trying to save all the Flash games that are going offline.
Yeah, the Flashpoint, right?
Yeah, Flashpoint.
Yeah, I ended up
It's
downloading that. Like once in a while, I'll go back and play some of the games that I remember from when I was young.
There's so many interesting things out there in terms of Flash games. I found a whole load of like old games that were like on websites to advertise real games, but they were just like little Flash demos of stuff. But it's a weird, crazy world in the Flash world. So I'd love to do a video on that at some point.
Yeah, I remember there was a period of like a few years where Flash games were like the big business thing. And all of a sudden you were getting these games that were had like the Flash identity to it, like the kind of
Mm.
weird experimental stuff, but it was made by like people who actually knew what they were doing. So it was a very weird combination of the independent solo project and the relatively polished, company. And I don't think I've ever seen anything like it before or since.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it was kind of before the days of downloadable titles on like Xbox Live Arcade and WiiWare and stuff like that. So it's in a way, it's kind of like where a lot of people got their starts in the industry. Because I know a few people who used to make Flash games as well, and they went on to work for like Sega and stuff like that in the future. So it was a great place for people to start, in terms of development as well as playing games.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember in high school I learned a tiny bit of Flash, and it's actually
Mm.
also a very easy thing to start learning, and so I can imagine that being a pretty solid entry point into programming.
Yeah, it is. When I was in college, I was actually learning Flash. I mean, that kind of dates me as well. But and then the year I left, they decided to shut Flash down, so everything I learned was kind of useless. But the foundations still apply. What about RPG Maker or anything like that? Did you ever play any games made using those sort of engines back then?
Not back then. I mean, in the years since, every so often I'll come across an RPG Maker game. I tend to
Yeah.
try to avoid them because so many of them just feel very samey. And also, for every one good RPG Maker game, there's like 100 terrible ones.
Oh yeah, you have to wade through piles of
Yeah.
rubbish to find anything worth playing, but there
Oh
are
yeah.
some gems out there. There definitely are.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I was just wondering because I know a few people that started with RPG Maker and then moved on to visual novels from there. So I was wondering whether that would be your start.
Okay.
So how did you get into visual novels then?
Oh yeah, this is the story I never get tired of telling people because
I did watch your video and I loved it, so please share.
okay, so growing up, I was about as separate from the anime culture as you could possibly be. Aside from Pokemon, because 90s kid, I had never even watched anime or been exposed to much Japanese media outside of video games. So I had a very Western media upbringing. And then in 2016, I remember browsing the internet and somebody referenced the cripple dating sim made by 4chan. So I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta try this out. And I was expecting a massive shit post. That was Katawa Shoujo, and it was really good. And it was actually a serious project. And by the time I realized it wasn't a joke, I was already completely hooked. And I binged the whole thing, taking the obligatory day or two break after each route because I was like, holy shit, I gotta process all this. And then that was when I was, looking into what this thing was, because like I'd never played what to me was like a game like this. It was just a story and it was nothing else. There was a choose your own adventure book. And that's when I learned the term visual novel. And I didn't like jump into visual novels immediately after that, but it was that moment that kind of opened the door and it made me much more receptive to reading some more in the future. So over time, I kind of slowly dipped my toes, and a few years later, I started reading them more regularly. And I'm like, yeah, this is a thing I'm gonna do now.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you actually started with a Western visual novel as well.
Yeah, I was like, what are the odds? And it was through visual novels that I eventually kind of got into the more weeb side of media and the internet as a whole. So, unlike most of my new internet acquaintances who started with anime and moved on to visual novels, I'm the other way around.
Yeah, you don't really hear many people that start that way around. I mean, I started out from watching anime and then looking on VNDB, going through all the old fan translations that were on there. Man, I spent so many hours reading visual novels back at uni. I kind of miss it these days. I should try and read some more, honestly.
Yeah, it's a unique experience to like when you find something that you like and it just kind of captures you for the dozens of hours they often take.
So what do you think it was about the experience of Katawa Shoujo that you really enjoyed compared to other games that you'd played before?
Hard to say. Part of it was that it was just something very different. I'd always kind of liked good stories in pretty much any medium. I'd been a big reader of books since I was a little kid and all this stuff. I mean, another part of it is it was definitely a very formative point in my life, just generally. That was about the time, 2016, I had kind of done a lot of introspection and
Mm.
trying to figure out what I thought on pretty much everything in the world, what I thought about politics, religion, my core beliefs.
How old were you when you played it, out of curiosity?
I was in college. I want to say I'm trying to do the math in my head right now. I was about 20 years old.
Yeah. Just trying to figure out what you wanted to do with life and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and everything, and that was at this point, and Kato Shoujo kind of hit me in a couple different ways. Part of it was the music, because the music is,
Mm.
I think it's one of the better visual novel soundtracks, honestly. And it was also at that point, Kato Shoujo was one of the first pieces of media that I'd experienced that used sexuality in a tasteful manner. Like it was something that was not there just for sex, it was there to advance the story. And combine that with the fact that it was a very formative point in my head, and that kind of also just made me think.
Mm. That's probably a really good starting
Yeah.
point as well for visual novels, because a lot of them don't use sexuality in that way, and you're just sort of thrust into these situations. So, to have a game like that that takes it a bit more seriously and actually integrates it in the story nicely is a really good starting point. And it probably didn't put you off like it might have if you played some other games before it.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like I've never been like it's not like, I'd see a tit and be like, "Oh
Yeah.
no." It was a case of
The way it was done was tasteful.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand
To
that.
me, to me it was always just whenever I had seen anything sexual in a piece of media, it was usually, to get the audience off.
Yeah. How do you feel about visual novel publishers these days taking away the adult content or, censoring things? Does that put you off playing them or not?
Sometimes it really depends on what it is, and
Yeah.
I don't mind if they give the readers the option, because and again, it really does depend on the title. Like if I were to give an example, Nekopada has a all ages version and an adult version. The story and the sex
Mm.
scenes really don't go together. So I honestly don't think it's that bad to read it without the adult scenes, aside from the fact that there's a very obvious time skip.
See, that's good to know, because I was tempted to download them on the Switch.
Oh yeah, yeah,
So I might go ahead and do that now, because they do look really nice.
yeah, yeah. Honestly, I that was another visual novel that I ended up getting because of the memes, and I'm like, oh no, this is actually like a really nice slice of life story. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, like
See, I haven't really seen anything outside of just cute cat girls in maid
yeah,
outfits. So I have no idea what the story's about, but I've heard it's good.
yeah. I was very pleasantly surprised by it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. Have you ever played? Well, I promised I wouldn't bring this up, but I will. Have you ever played Conad?
It's on my to-do
Obviously, it's a
list.
classic.
I do have it
No.
downloaded and in my visual novel folder. It's just
You need to
one
play
of
it.
like a million visual novels in that folder.
It was the first one that properly got me obsessed with the genre. Probably too much. Like literally every night I would play it until like 3 or 4 in the morning. I maxed out all of the save slots. There was like 10 pages of saves and they were all full.
Yeah,
I had to go back and overwrite the first one in the end.
yeah. I mean,
But man, I
again, I
loved
haven't
it.
read Clannad Net, but I've had that exact same kind of experience. So like, I completely get
Yeah.
where you're coming from.
I thought you would have. Like
Yeah.
they are so easy to get engrossed in, especially if you mix the audio, the way the characters are written as well in a visual novel compared to
Oh,
an
yeah.
anime. It's just they spend the time to flesh the characters out, don't they? Which you don't really get in a typical show.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is also, I think, because visual novels are essentially like a text-based medium that
Mm,
has the benefit of music and visuals and all this stuff. And within anime, you're stuck with 22-minute episodes and usually
Yeah.
a 12 episode season. That's 4 hours per story arc, basically. With a visual novel, you can get to the hundreds of thousands of words, so they can take the time to actually build all that up. Yeah.
they can flesh it out properly. Yeah.
Mhm.
It definitely helps. But a lot of people probably either don't have the patience or they're a bit put off at the idea of reading on a screen sort of thing. So it's a bit difficult to get into, but when you do, you're guaranteed to really get engrossed in it if you enjoy the story.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, for me, when it comes to a visual novel, it's always the first 20 minutes or so that can be the gatekeeping point. It's like, once I kind of get myself into this world, I'll be hooked.
Yeah.
But like those first few minutes can sometimes be kind of rough, and I sometimes can understand why people are hesitant to actually get into it.
So are there any that you actually gave up on because they were either too slow or you just didn't enjoy, what you were playing in those first few hours?
There's been stuff that I've dropped, but it's never usually due to the fact that it's never usually due to anything but the visual novel itself. It's usually something distracting me in real life
Yeah.
or something else kind of taking priority, and I just don't get to it for a few days or a week or so. And by that time, I'm kind of like,
You forgot what's going on.
Exactly.
I was trying to play through Fruits of Grisaya, if you've heard of
Okay.
that one.
I've heard of it, haven't read it yet.
It's a daunting visual novel to read. I had to look on VNDB. It's like 130 hours long.
Oh yeah.
And I was playing it like every night, just in the evenings, and then I left it for a month and I came back and I'd completely forgot what was going on. Couldn't remember what half the characters were talking about. So I really have no chance of carrying this on now, do I?
Yeah, it's for me, I've learned that I kind of have to, if I'm going after like a chunky visual novel, I've got to kind
Yeah.
of do it all at once. Especially if there's multiple routes. Like, because I don't want to replay the common route every single time. So I want to remember what's going on in there, so then I can just do route after route after route, and then I can kind
Yeah.
of
Do you
let it
follow a
leave my
guide?
head.
Yeah. Do you follow a guide or anything when you're playing, or do you just put a save point at one of the choices and hope you pick the right one?
Yeah, I'll usually just do saves at the choices. Sometimes I'll look and see if there's a recommended route
Yeah.
order, so that I can, loosely follow that. I mean that it was after I read Euphoria, because they have, suggested route orders online, and I think that actually following the order there really adds to the
Hmm.
experience. So ever since then, I usually will do a quick Google search before I start.
Yeah, without spoiling too much. YouTube now. I just want to kind of staying on the topic of visual novels, but how do you decide which ones you want to make videos about, and how are you kind of picking which bits to include in your scripts as well? Are you scripting it as you're playing, or do you play it and then think about the video that would follow it afterwards?
I don't script while I'm reading, but I do kind of think about what I'm gonna say as I'm reading, because my thoughts do change as I'm going through a story. And obviously once the story ends, I kind of have an idea of what the entire picture is. So once I read a visual novel and I know I'm making a video about it, I just kind of start writing. I try to think of what points I want to emphasize the most, what sticks in my head. What is it I want to tell the audience? And then, I just kind of start writing. And then from there I can usually figure out where I'm going to go from there.
And how about recording footage? Do you go back and pick out bits that you want to talk about, or do you like record the whole thing and then try and pick out the bits as you're editing?
It's going to depend on what the visual novel is in particular. And I play around with it from time to time too, just to see what looks good. If it's a gameplay heavy visual novel, or if it's something that can arguably be a game more than a visual novel, I'll usually just record as I'm going, and then
Yeah.
if I feel like I've had enough footage, I might stop the recording. But a lot of times, if I'll just take the CGs and I'll take screenshots of them, or if I can find a CG library and just use those, just add a little bit of a pan and zoom effect, and I'm good to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. And they usually look a bit nicer than the gameplay as well, don't they?
Oh yeah, because
Yeah.
the gameplay, if you can even call it that, is literally just a background,
Oh.
2 sprites, and a text box.
Yeah. Do you call it gameplay? Do you call it reading?
Not no,
I don't know.
it's not.
It's not really
It really
gameplay, is
isn't
it?
gameplay.
No.
No, it is technically you interacting with it, but that's about where it ends. I'm one of those people who, there are some things that I just do not call visual novels, even though they're on VNDB. Like, I feel like there's definitely a line. Whereas, visual novel can have some gameplay, but if the gameplay is the point, I don't really consider it a visual novel.
Yeah, I was thinking about that just before this, actually. How would you class something like Danganronpa? I know it's technically a visual novel, but there's also like walking around and puzzle solving and stuff. I don't know where to
I,
place it, really.
I mean, I haven't really done too much with Danganronpa. I've been meaning to get through it at some point, but it I would classify it as a little more of a game than a
Yeah.
visual novel.
Yeah,
But
I
like I can
think
kind of see where both sides are coming from with that.
yeah, same probably applies to like the Phoenix Wright games as well.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely consider those games.
Yeah, yeah, especially with all the puzzle solving and
Yeah.
inventory management and walking around and stuff. Yeah, back on the topic of YouTube, I did go right back to the start of your channel, and your first ever video was actually a speed run. Like nothing like the rest of your videos. How did that one appear?
Yeah. Well, that's actually that wasn't my first video, but it's the
That still exists.
earliest one that
Yeah,
I haven't privated or deleted. Yeah. So like back I started my channel
mm,
before I really got into visual novels. So I initially wanted to be just gaming, doing gaming stuff. And I think my initial idea was I didn't really have like a solid plan, but I kind of wanted to do almost like a game maker's toolkit kind of thing where I was talking about, the inner workings of games, but
yeah.
not from like the hyper technical stuff like he might do, but from like I have this observation about this game or this type of game. I want to talk about it. So my first video was actually on RuneScape, where I was talking about how the economy of the game mirrors real life economy, and talked about that. And then I was kind of bouncing around topics for a while doing that. And the speedrun one was just I played Hand of Fate, and I enjoyed the game. And that was about the time I kind of learned what speedrunning was. So I'm like, I kind of want to try this. And so I decided to speedrun Hand of Fate. I didn't stick with it once I, did that run because there's literally zero community for it. But hey, I got the world record, so I have that
Yeah, and then from that you went on to
accomplishment.
the Celeste video, which is kind of like a video essay, but it's only like 2 minutes long.
Yeah, that one. It was.
I enjoyed that video. It was interesting, and it seemed like, even though it was like your first proper video where you're doing narration and stuff, it seemed really professionally made. So, had some of the earlier ones that you'd done that you'd privated also been in that sort of style?
Yeah, most of them were like I had a topic, I wrote a bit about it, and then
Yeah,
did that. And I mean, the big reason I deleted a lot of the earlier videos, which I mean wasn't too many of them, but it was because I still really had no idea what I was doing as far as the technical side. So my audio was absolutely terrible. I hadn't really established a writing style. There are just issues left and right to the point where I would watch them back. Some of them I couldn't even watch. And I would say, like, I don't want this to be someone's introduction to me.
yeah. That's how everyone starts, though.
Yeah.
You have to build up
Oh
from
yeah, I
nothing.
don't regret the having made the videos, and I don't regret the time spent on them. But I'm like, with like I have like a standard of quality now where I'm just like,
Mm.
even though
You don't want that to be someone's introduction
yeah,
if it's
yeah, it's like even
recommended
though
or
the
something.
older stuff that's still available isn't really my best stuff, like that's a little bit more reflective of what I'm capable of.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a difficult decision, isn't it? I've decided to leave everything there, but I know that it probably does hurt the channel in the long term.
Yeah.
But,
I, I
yeah, it's
I wouldn't
difficult.
say it matters a whole lot. It's just
No,
it's just again on like a technical level, some of the like again the audio in those old videos was so horrendously bad
yeah.
that like I don't know how I did that and thought that was acceptable.
Yeah, you're like, this is good. I'm going to upload this. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
crackly and blowing the microphone out and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Back to like 2008 YouTube.
Oh yeah.
It might have flown well back then.
Yeah, and the worst part is I was doing 2008 content in 2017.
Well, you've come a long way. The video I actually found, obviously, as a lot of people did, is your Toho video. That's the first one that YouTube
Yeah.
recommended me, and I subscribed from that one. So, talk a bit about Toho. How did you find out about that series?
Well, I mean, I was kind of vaguely aware of it. I mean, if you know about any kind of bullet hell game, Toho's gonna come up in conversation because it's probably the biggest bullet hell franchise in the world. And it was one of those ones. Eventually, you kind of learn how much it infests other areas of pop culture. Like even to me, in my very westernized experience, had seen Toho references everywhere, like the music. Everybody knows UN Owen was her.
And Bad Apple,
And
that appears everywhere.
yeah, and Bad Apple.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Flowering Nights. Like so eventually I was kind of like, I kind of want to see what this is all about. There's like a bunch. I don't know where to really start with it. And that was also at the point where I kind of wanted to start doing bigger, more ambitious videos. Because I think the Toho video was like my second or third, what I would consider big videos, or not, my standards for what was a big video back then were a lot different than they are now. Because I was considering like 20 minutes a very long video at the time.
I was going to say, some of yours are like well over an hour long.
Oh, yeah. So, and so I decided one of the things I wanted to do was like full series retrospectives, call them the evolution of whatever. And I did a few of those, but Toho was the first one. And I remember uploading that video, and I'd spent longer on that video than I had any video previously. I spent probably about 30 hours playing the games, and then, another 20 plus doing all the scripting and recording and editing and all that. And it was definitely my longest edited video at the time.
So you'd never played the games before you started working on the video?
Nope.
Oh, wow. None of them at all. That's interesting.
No. So I mean, obviously I was very terrible at them. And I hadn't played very much Bullet Hell in general. So, I mean, I actually didn't even end up beating all of the games, but I at least, put a good hour or two into each one to try to make sure I knew what I was doing.
To understand what's different about them and stuff.
Yeah. So I remember uploading that video. I think it was Christmas Eve. And I think I had just hit 300 subscribers at the time. And it did okay at the start. Like, it did a little bit better than average. And then all of a sudden, I remember looking at my analytics 2 or 3 months later. And, up until that point, I was getting pretty much a consistent, like, 25 subscribers a month.
Yeah.
And I was at my level of growth, I was pretty proud of that. Yeah, because I went from 100 to 300 subscribers in a year. I was like, I was putting effort into my channel and actually seeing some results. Then all of a sudden, I looked at my analytics one day and I realized, my subscriber count went up 200 in the last week.
Oh, wow.
What is this? Or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers. And then I'm like, holy shit, all of my numbers are up. And I mean, you'll know this as a creator. If a video is doing really well and it's an older video, it's hard to tell because you'll just see your overall numbers go up.
Yeah.
But you won't see the actual video because it's, buried and YouTube shows you the most recent stuff. So eventually I'm like, what the hell's going on? And one of my other friends is like, oh yeah, your Toho video's got 20,000 views. I'm like, what?
Wow, that was probably mind-blowing for you at the time.
Yeah. And it's like, and you can see that the Toho video comprises about half the views on my channel right now.
Yeah.
And, it didn't really blow up at the start. It took a few, probably about 2 months before it really started.
Like that. You really can't tell what's going to take off or not.
Yeah. Like it suddenly got a nice boost. And then all of a sudden it shot up from there.
Yeah.
And
after that, did you feel any sort of worry about making future videos to try and live up to that? Or did it not really affect your output that much?
A little bit. Like, the whole thing was very, very surreal. Because, I had 300 subscribers, and then 3 months later, I was monetized from that one video, basically. And then I kind of wanted to capitalize it, but I also didn't really know how to do that. I didn't really, I was still early in my learning process. I didn't know much about YouTube in general. Yeah. I knew how to make okay content, but that was about it. And I know they always say content is king, but that's only one skill of many, really.
Yeah, you have to be multi-talented with YouTube. There's so many things that you need to think about in order to, keep one-upping yourself every video.
Yeah, so I mean, I ended up, you will see I tried some stuff at the time to sort of test waters to try to kind of appeal to that audience I had gained. I made more evolution videos that none of them ended up doing very well. I did, and eventually, it was the Toho video was a big factor, but also when I made the Muv-Luv video. And that also gained some traction. 'Cause, like, even though it didn't gain the numbers that the Toho video did, the engagement I've gotten from that is like off the charts. And like most of the people who are the most active in my community now came from that video.
Yeah, that's good. I guess that one's closer to the style that you went for a bit later on, isn't it, really?
Yeah, definitely. And ultimately, it was the Toho video and the Muv-Luv video that made me think, maybe I should kind of switch from the general gaming stuff. I had already been doing occasional visual novel videos at that point because it was something I enjoyed in my free time, and I figured the channel is basically me showcasing things I enjoy. So at that point, I think the two videos that did the most for my channel were about weeb shit.
Yeah, I think it was really helpful for both of them to take off for you because it kind of gives you that clear direction, doesn't it?
Yeah, I kind of said, you know what? When I'm talking about anime stuff in general, even though I'm still not at that point not very well versed in anime, I'm like, this anime stuff is working for me. So that's kind of I'm going to lean into that a little more. So I started doing a little bit more visual novel stuff. I started doing a little bit more on JRPGs as opposed to other game genres. And eventually I kind of realized I think that's just going to be the thing I'm just going to focus in on the main channel. I ended up making a second channel that I do. If I have anything I want to do that's not weeb, I'm going to put it on there. Although,
I did notice you had a second one.
Yeah, I haven't touched it in a while just because I'm busy, but I think it's good to have that kind of all segregated from my main thing that people know me for.
It's definitely a good idea. That was something I struggled with a long time, was just flip-flopping between different topics every video, and people would come and go, but if you focus on something, so in your case, if you focus on the anime style games and the visual novels, people will keep coming back to the channel, and that will help you grow even more in the future. And then if you have somewhere else to offload all the other stuff that you still want to make, and then you don't sort of get bored then, at least, because you've always got this other outlet for your other creative ideas.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I've always wanted to do, I've never wanted to be so tunneled in on one thing that I can't have any freedom in my content. Like, I think the best example is a lot of gameplay channels that will only be one game.
Oh yeah.
Where they'll get an audience of that game, but then they have to make videos on that game every day for the rest of their career.
Yeah, I know someone who's stuck playing Mario Maker levels and he can't get away from it.
Yeah, I could never do that. I would enjoy it for a few months and then I would begin to hate everything. So that's one thing is I do try to structure my overall presence in a way that allows me some degree of freedom. And I think I finally struck that balance with where it's primarily visual novel stuff, but I have the freedom to kind of flex out and do, anime or JRPGs or anything kind of in the weeb sphere.
Outside of YouTube, do you have any other sort of creative endeavors?
As far as creative, not so much. I mean, most of my creative stuff goes into YouTube. Although, I mean, I enjoy reading books still. I did used to play music. I don't really do that anymore. I like to watch TV, and nowadays I'm very busy, so I don't really have much time for anything else.
Yeah, that's fair. It's always trying to juggle everything, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you'd thought about like writing or anything. Your scripts are really good, so I was just wondering like novels or anything, or whether you'd thought about making a visual novel in like Renpai or something like that.
I mean, I'm not against playing around with that in the future sometime, but I mean, I've done a small amount of writing, mostly for school assignments. Yeah. I will say that creating the stories isn't quite as appealing to me as digging into them. And I think part of it is because I know there's like a very long and hard process of becoming a really good fiction writer. I think I find more satisfaction at kind of analyzing stuff written by people who've already gotten to that point.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's always something you could think about in the future. As long as you're enjoying what you're doing, that's the main thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely times when I'm reading a story, I'm like, how the hell did somebody manage to do this? Like,
You've made me want to read more, just in general, not just visual novels. I used to love reading fiction, and I've kind of moved away from it just because there's so much going on. But I really need to try and make time for it.
Yeah, I mean, not that long ago, I ended up switching jobs, partly because I needed a more flexible schedule because I'm back in school.
Because you've got too many visual novels to read.
Yeah, that yeah, that doesn't that number always seems to go up.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, one thing with my new job is now there's periods of downtime where I'm kind of just I have to be there, but I'm not always having to do something right at any one moment. And so I've gotten back into reading regular books lately. So I've actually been really enjoying that, and so I've been just plowing through whatever I got and ordering more.
Sounds like the perfect job.
I mean, for the time being, yeah. I mean, I the big thing was I needed the flexibility because now that I'm back in school, that's a lot of time in the week that I need to be able to go to class. I need to be able to do my work and be able to section off that time. So
yeah, it's good you've found a balance there then.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not something that's sustainable in the long term because otherwise I will go insane, but it'll do until I graduate.
Yeah, it works for now.
Yes.
I've got to head back to my work in a minute, actually. Is there anything you wanted to tell the listeners before we wrap up? Any future plans that you've got?
I don't have any future plans at the moment because I just actually finished a video recently. But to anyone watching this, read the Muv-Luv trilogy.
I'm tempted to. I watched your video yesterday on the Muv-Luv games.
Yeah, I mean, it's something like 100 hours of reading. I did that all in a few weeks because it just hooked me that much.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really did enjoy talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a good time.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and look forward to more guests coming soon.